Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer DLC faction speculation video. Today we're going to be looking at the nation of Araby, a rather interesting idea for a video considering the fact that Creative Assembly did currently shoot down Araby as a possible playable faction for the future. However, things could change, so without further ado, let's begin. Araby is one of those interesting factions. They were a very proud and powerful nation way back in the day, but greed made them overextend themselves, to which they declared war on nations that were more powerful than they were. The nation of Araby found itself destroyed, but still they carried on. The desert dwellers built some decently large cities, established very large trading networks, and still managed to stay somewhat influential throughout the Warhammer world. The people of Araby still had some decently powerful armies, and those are the ones that we're going to look at today to see what possible army roster we might see in Total War Warhammer. Just a quick note here that Araby did not have an official army book in terms of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Instead, they actually featured in another Warhammer fantasy game called War Master, where they had a semi-decently large roster, nothing too big, but enough to actually start off an army. The first unit would be the Spearmen. They fight with a combination of tall spears and shields. Very standard in most human armies, but remember Araby is also a human faction, so a lot of their stuff will also carry out the same. They are known to be well disciplined and will probably feature very high leadership, but other than that, just generic spearmen. Just a quick note before we move on, while there were no official rules, it is also mentioned that there are warriors that use swords. These are curved blades, as you can expect from a Warhammer nation very much inspired by our ancient Middle East, but they never had rules for some reason. However, to make sure that we have balance in terms of frontline infantry, it's also very much likely that we'll see these swordsmen being created too. Next we have the standard bowman, which can be expected once again in every standard human-based army. We're going to see a lot of ununique units in this army because at the end of the day, humans pretty much fight the same way, but I think we can all agree that bowmen are rather important to any frontline basis to any army. Next would be the unit known as the Guard. These seem to be the most elite of the infantry units, wearing ostentatious clothing and armor. They seem to be better in hand-to-hand combat than most others. I'm assuming their name would probably be changed considering that Guard just seems too generic. But once again, a elite heavy infantry unit is also always welcome. Now we move on to the Knights, which would obviously have their names probably changed too. They have long lances, tall helmets and glittering armor. More than likely you'd be using these units the same way that you would use your Reichsguard, for example. And next we have the Desert Riders, which seem to be a very skirmishing based fast cavalry. They're light cavalry, they can fire on the move. Essentially, think of them and use them as the Bretonnian yeomen. I wanted to go over those units rather quickly because they're quite generic and we know that they're going to be coming. Now we're actually moving to more unique units. First we have camel riders. Whilst normally these animals are actually just beasts of burden, it makes sense for warriors to mount upon them, especially on the desert. Going into the real world thing here, it makes sense to ride upon camels whilst you're in the desert, considering that camels can live a lot longer without water than, say, for example, horses. These could be a somewhat heavy cav unit. They might not exactly be too fast, but they would still be rather durable. Moving swiftly on, we have the Magic Carpets, which seem to be a very fast-moving aerial cavalry. Ranged aerial cavalry might not have too much of a good basis for Total War Warhammer, but I suppose you could actually use them to go war machine hunting, which could be rather useful. Next we have the Elephants. So elephant riders seem to be quite popular as a late game elite unit. They wouldn't be as large as, say, for example, the Norscan War Mammoth, so in that case you'd probably see them in squads, say maybe 4 or 5 together, heavily armored elephants with a rider or a few riders on top that can fire and also use rather long spears. These would be your line breaker units. You'd use them to charge right through and just disrupt enemy lines. You could also use them to flank or take on enemy monsters. These would be terror-causing units and extremely durable given the nature of what an elephant actually is. Unfortunately, Araby and War Master didn't really have quite the large roster, and in truth, War Master itself wasn't that big of a game, so none of the armies were that big. However, there is a monstrous mount that could also be a standalone unit, that of the Djinn. Yes, these are essentially genies, but remember that back in the day, Games Workshop weren't really that original, as evident with these armies, but hey, you know, it's still flavor. There are various different types of Djinn, and each of them represent a different element. For example, there are water-based ones, wind-based ones, fire-based ones, and desert-based ones, all of them kind of common to see in Araby. These are considered to be lesser demons in a certain sense, and could be mid to late game units for Araby. There's also the Royal Djinn, which they say that the only 3 exist, and they could actually be probably summoned in via a rite or something to make it more interesting. Maybe these Djinn could actually be singular units, but given some bound spells to give the army some flavor and also some heavy use of magic. But with that, now we're going to move towards the Lords and Heroes. First we have the Grand Viziers, which act as the generic army general. These would be heavy based melee units that could possibly also ride a horse, a camel, or an elephant. The same could also be said about the Emirs or Sheiks, which would act as the hero choice, just a weaker version of that, and you could use them as agents too. Given the fact that Araby also has a large history of assassins, we'd probably see an assassin type hero being created. Nothing too out there, but it is known that the assassins of Araby are actually masters of poison, so it could be that they'll actually be created as a debuffer unit rather than an outright melee unit. Lastly, we would have the Araby Sorcerer, which would most likely act as a lord or hero choice. They would probably have access to the Law of Fire, but there were also some spells actually established for Araby. Nothing too great, but maybe it'll be called the Law of the Deserts or something. First we have a basic spell called Sandstorm, which reduces leadership. Next we have Mirage, which actually duplicates units and creates a mirage with them. This would be rather interesting. In Warmaster they couldn't move or fight, but what I could see them actually doing is making them move and being able to hold down enemies. They'd also be counted as ethereal units, so they'd take reduced damage, so think of them as clan rats just like with Hexwraith powers. Next would be Sunstrike, which seems to act like a generic magic missile spell. And lastly, Curse of the Djinn, which actually in Warmaster would make you re-roll your successful armor saves. I'm imagining that here it would actually be created to possibly do a direct damage on a unit and that's it. There weren't really a lot of spells here created for Araby, but I believe that this is a good basis to start something off with. Obviously, it will need a Vortex spell and probably something as a buff, but that's pretty much it. There were 2 other units established in the lore, but pretty much nothing was given towards them. First we have the eunuchs, which would be counted as slave units. You'd essentially use these units as the melee versions of Skaven slaves. Nothing too great, but at least you'll have something as a tar pit unit. And lastly are the dervishes, which are considered to be some of the more fanatical fighters. They'd probably be akin to the flagellants, being an unbreakable unit that you essentially just send to die, but hey, they'll do something at least. In terms of legendary lords, I don't believe there's a lot to go through. A lot of people believe that the Golden Magus would actually be a legendary lord, considering the fact that he's a very powerful spellcaster, he's actually quite established and so on, but I believe in the trailer for Dreadfleet they actually established him as dead. So I'm not sure if that could just be an assumption that they've actually put him as dead, or he's actually dead. Sultan Jafar is also a possible choice, despite the fact that he was alive many years before where we are in the timeline right now. We've seen a lot of changes in the timeline, for example Rapunzel being alive, Vlad von Carstein and so on. It's very likely we could see a character like Suleiman the Saracen as a generic legendary lord, but he's not really a faction leader, is he? Plus, it's more than likely that they would like to avoid Suleiman the Saracen given the fact that the name is directly taken from history, and, you know, I'm just saying, remember that Games Workshop was just not that original when coming up with stuff back then. And I don't think that Al-Mukhtar should be created as a legendary lord for Araby. Instead, I'd like to see him for a Dogs of War faction if we ever get one. It could be very possible that Games Workshop and Creative Assembly could work together once again to create 1 or 2 new characters, but honestly time will tell. But with that, we've looked at pretty much every available unit that was already established in the lore. Are there any other units that I missed out, or do you think there's others in very obscure parts of the lore that might be able to help flesh out the roster a bit more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a bit of a discussion, shall we? But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description link below, we have various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram and Discord, where you can get in contact with the Great Book team and talk to us about anything Warhammer related, or pretty much anything else really. Also in the description link below, we have an affiliate link with Element Games where you can buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Purchasing using that link and also using our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. Honestly, it's amazing that people want to help a small channel grow and get to a high level of content. A big thank you to our patron Gibraltar LUSC for subscribing to us at our Fane level. Honestly, mate, it's super cool. And a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing and commenting on the videos. The channel has been growing at a really fast rate lately and we don't really understand why, but we're really enjoying being able to talk to Warhammer fans across the globe. It's honestly amazing and it's something that we've never really had planned for, but hey, it seems to be working. But with that, my friends, thank you for watching once again and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.